So I think the church should be more focused on the foster to adopt process of the people walking through than the entertainment process of what's happening in the church. I think you will find a much more measurable, valid means of growing a church if you spend more time discussing how we're going to love and treat people than you do how are we going to, what music are we going to play on Sunday? Are we going to have pews or chairs? Are we going to have the preacher wear a suit, or are we going to have him look like he's there to mow the lawn when he walks in the door? You know, we discuss all of those things when we start talking about church growth and church revitalization and church awakenings. And we say, these are the topics that come up. But the truth is, the deciding factor is, do we love people enough that when God sends us broken people, people that are going to break our hearts, do we love them and care for them and give them an opportunity? Or do we say, we're going to call an agency and have them send us better candidates? Because
Well, see,
there's
that
the
would be, I
community.
think, maybe the opposite of what James was talking about. If true religion is loving the orphans and the widows, the people that come in the door who you quote unquote don't want, if the opposite of that would be concentrating on the visuals, on the music, on the chairs, on the pews, on the colors, on the how does the church look from the sign. I guess more of kind of like if we ourselves were very pompous, we would concentrate on what do I look like? What are my clothes? So if the church, does the church concentrating on the building, or are they concentrating on the people, would be true religion versus non-true religion.
Right? Dad always said that beauty is skin deep, but ugly goes all the way to the bone.
Yeah.
And that's the church. You know, we can be superficial and we can look right, and it's just superficial. It can look all kinds of ways, but if we're ugly on the inside, it'll go to the very core existence of the church. It will break the church. And it's really amazing to watch that in church. To listen to a church use verbiage, us and them, they, those people. Those are phrases I've heard in church. I was sitting with a youth minister of another church, his pastor, me, and a youth minister from our church at one of our previous churches. And their youth minister said, well, because we were doing twice a week, my youth minister and I were teaching a life skills class at the local alternative school. We were going in and talking about how do you manage relationships, how do you manage friendships, what makes you a good coworker at work. We were talking about simple personality life skills. We were using a biblical base, teaching practical life skills that made individuals that were coming out of broken homes and horrible situations, gave them a better chance at being successful in school and in life. And the other youth minister told my youth minister, sitting at a table around chips and salsa, because we were at a Mexican restaurant getting ready to have lunch, well, you can't build a good youth group around those kids. And it was the last luncheon we had with that. I had no interest in being engaged in a partnership with a church, a friendship with a church that had a clear delineation of these kids and those kids. They're all kids who need Jesus, who need love, whether they grew up in a mansion and they're spoiled and it makes them bad kids, or they grew up on the street and they're impoverished and that makes them bad kids. They just need Jesus. They need love. They need direction. And the church's job is to embrace that foster to adopt process that God's given us. I love that we can encourage both a healing of the orphans by a foster to adopt and a healing of the church by a foster adopt process, that both can bring huge improvement to the life and the value of life around us.
And a testimony, I think, to the community. As much as I think concentrating on the things that aren't of God hurts the church, concentrating on the things that are of God, I think, elevates the church. True religion.
It doesn't mean we don't need to talk about worship songs, the way we dress when we come to church. It doesn't mean those things are irrelevant. It just means that they are secondary to the main thing. You know, the simple phrase is keep the main thing the main thing. And loving people as much as we love Jesus is the main thing. Making it easier for those people to come in, whether those people be coming from another church, from a church background, from a wealthy background, from a poor background, for the fosters, the visitors coming into the church, Make it so that when they walk in the church, they're engaged and welcomed by their surroundings and by the people, is a powerful part of that. You know, when you foster a child, you don't want them to come in and you point at a chair in the corner and say, you know, well, you can stay in that chair until we find a spot for you. And once you're adopted, your opinion will matter. That's not how you treat a child when you foster them into your home. You want them to come in and find a bed. You want them to come in and find a bag of things that are theirs. You want them to have a place of belonging. And in the same manner, the church wants individuals to come in and find that they feel like they belong there. And the way we worship and the way we dress and the way we put church together kind of presents that. Well, so the idea, this is a meme that kind of has been floated around for about the last year and a half, and it's come back around again, and talking about as we quit using hymnals, we're losing doctrinal foundation of the church. And as a preacher, teacher, I take issue with that. The hymns and the worship are an important part of what church is, but doctrine is a teaching of the church. This kind of ties our last two topics together. We talked about social media and consuming fake news and all of that. So many Christians who I respect and care for have shared that meme and went, I agree with this, you know, this is powerful, I see this to be true. And when you read the article, first of all, read the article before you share it. Just because you agree with the heading doesn't mean it's a the one that I'm talking about is a poorly written article that uses manipulated information to make its point. Yes, there is a measurable, graphable trend towards a weaker doctrine in the church. And at the same time, we've seen a decline in the use of hymnals. And the assumption of the writer is, well, then that's the cause and effect. Well, correlation and cause and effect are not the same thing. Be an informed student. The same time frame that we've seen the decrease in doctrine, yes, we've seen a decrease in the use of hymnals. But if you want to find the actual cause and effect that correlates directly with it, you see a downtrend on Wednesday night, Sunday night church, and discipleship training in the church. We've stopped doing discipleship training. Discipleship training was where we taught the doctrine of the church. And because we've stopped doing Sunday night 5 o'clock classes where we have discipleship training, where we taught people what once saved, always saved really means, where we taught people what it meant, how grace worked and forgiveness worked and atonement worked, where we talked about the deeper subjects that helped found our doctrine as a church. We've abandoned those classes because they were poorly attended. Now we're losing doctrine. There's a cause and effect, not just a correlation. And so as a people, when we go, well, we're putting away our hymnals and we're seeing doctrine dissolve, if we pick our hymnals back up, well, that's like me saying, you know, 100% of the people who died in the last 10 years drink water. So if we quit drinking water, people will live longer. That's not true at all. There's a correlation, but it's not a cause and effect. And so just say, we'll pick back we'll put the projector screens away and we'll pick up hymnals and the doctrine will fix itself. No, it won't. Doctrine is a teaching. And so celebrating something, rejoicing about it, learning it in song is powerful. But doctrine is we sit down and say, okay, now I believe grace is greater than all my sins. But what does that mean? Does it just mean that grace is bigger than sin, therefore everybody's forgiven and we all get to go to heaven? No, that's not what that means. Just because I can sing, you know, it is well with my soul. That song was written by a man that suffered deep emotional loss, deep physical loss, who studied and searched out who can God be and why would God let this happen. He had a depth of doctrinal knowledge that laid a foundation for a song about where he had arrived at, not a song that taught him where he needed to go. And so the hymns, whether we sing them out of the hymn book or we sing them off the projector screen or we sing a repetitive song that just simply worships in who God is, without a doctrine or foundation, they're not going to take us far. And so if the church wants to turn around the decay of doctrine, we need to go back to discipleship training and strong Wednesday night classes, not bring back hymnals. Hymnals is a patch. It
Well,
is a
if you
superficial.
think that statement through, it kind of doesn't make sense. They didn't have hymnals back when Christ was here, and I'm sure that that they had good doctrine. And then also the songs that are written in our current hymnals are mostly 1800, 1700, 1900 songs.
And most of the songs that are in our hymnal were rejected when they were produced as new songs too.
Yeah, and of course, for 1700 years after Christ, they didn't have any hymnals. So the statement in itself, I think, has good intentions to
Right.
say that we don't ever need to get away from good doctrine, but the hymnal itself is not the doctrine; it's the Bible, it's
Right.
Scripture.
And so separating out and saying, I love the hymnals and the way they make me feel. That's a true statement that there's no harm in. A church member should be very comfortable to just say, I like the hymnals and I like the way they make me feel in church.
Yeah.
Great. Let's have that discussion. That is a factual statement about how you feel and how hymns responding. I'm out of place as a person who has spent the last 20 years of my life trying to lead churches in church revitalization and trying to turn a tide towards reaching younger families. A lot of ministers that do that focus on aesthetics that actually I don't like. And so I'm a little out of place in that. But I do understand that a lot of what we're talking about in that isn't the identity of the church, they're the preference of the church. And your preference is not your identity. If I shave my goatee off, people in my family, the goatee, what people in Altrona don't understand is the goatee I'd only grown the goatee out for about a month before you guys contacted me. So most of my pictures before moving out here don't have the goatee in it. So if I shave the goatee off, I'm much more recognizable to my family back home. That's who I look like. I would look very weird to people here because they've only known it with it. In the same mindset, somebody who comes into church that their only experience with Christian music is the music they hear on K-Love, the hymnal music is very awkward to them. But you bring somebody that grew up in church, the hymnal music is very comfortable and very much, and the new music is a little bit different. We're talking about preferences, not doctrinal facts. Doctrinally speaking, our music team meets on Mondays. We look at the songs we're talking about singing. We discuss them, whether they're coming out of the hymnal or they're coming off of CCLI, Worship Now, whether we're downloading them or we're opening the hymnal. We look at them and say, this is what the sermon's about. This is what God's telling us. Does that song teach a truth, celebrate a truth? Does it lead us in the direction we need to go? We don't care where it comes from. Now, the preference, once we found songs that fit that, we go, okay, there are people more comfortable singing out of the hymnal, so let's find the songs within that group that come out of the hymnal. There are people who like the more modern songs they hear on the radio. Let's find songs and put them together. But our criterion, it begins with a doctrinal scriptural foundation to the songs, then gets deciphered into preferences. And when church will get back to that, when church will get back to simply saying, what are the doctrinal foundations? Now within that, what can we do? Is wearing a suit a doctrinal mandate? Is showing reverence to who God is and respecting Him? Yeah, that is. In our culture, is dressing up in a suit the way we do that anymore? Some would say yes, some would say no. Now we're getting into our cultural norms. And so what we need to examine all of those under the light of that doctrinal mandate. The doctrinal mandate is expressed through the foster to adopt demonstration of the church's true religion, I guess.
And I understand preference. I grew up with hymnals, and when I go to a church and I hear a hymnal, it gives me a calming, secure feeling, and I get that. I really do.
I'm an old book person, and I use an iPad for all my study because I can carry my huge library in the palm of my hand. But in my office and in my books downstairs here in storage until my office is complete, I have 100 and 150-year-old books. And I have a lot of Bibles because they're cool. Old Bibles are just cool, and finding notes that people have written in them. And even though I'm not a singer or a song person, I have old hymnals because I have hymnals from my dad's first church. I have hymnals from the little church in the little Christian church in Orlando where I got saved. I mean, I have hymnals that were just in my grandma's books that we found, old hymnals that are just, they're cool, and you go in and read them, and some of those songs I've never heard of before, but you can tell they've been well sung. Those pages have been worn by a group of people who those songs spoke to. And worship is just that. When Paul was the traveling preacher that was trying to help the church organize, and he was writing the pastoral epistles and trying to help the church get on a doctrinal footing to move forward. He didn't have a King James Bible, and he didn't have a hymnal. That doesn't make the King James Bible and the hymnal bad. It just makes it really shaky ground for the church to try and declare these are foundational things we have to have.
Right. And going back to, if true religion is going after those widows, the orphans, going after the people who are hurting, if that's true religion, our focus needs to be on getting them in the church, the Bible and true doctrine. And then whatever else that we can do to facilitate that, let's try it. Let's do that, as long as it's, of course, not.
So visitation and outreach are the headlights of the church.
Yeah.
The car does not exist to shine light on the road in front of it. It shines light on the road in front of it so that it can travel forward. The church doesn't exist to visit. The visitor is not the object of the church. God is. But we visit so that we can do what God's calling us to do, because He's called us to love the widows and to care for the widows and orphans, to love, to reach out, to share, to go. And so we do that because of that relationship, and it generates us to move forward. It generates that motion. But too often, I think that the swing church was internalized for several decades, and so then we decided we were going to externalize and we were going to become seeker-friendly. And the objective of the church became the visitor. We went from measuring church based on baptisms to based on how many visitors you have Sunday. Preachers went from talking about how many people got saved to how many people visited your church. And you start looking at a church that's going, we exist so that people will be comfortable visiting us. No, we exist to give glory to God, and we give glory to God by loving people, and when we love people, they visit us. And so while they can look similar, and they can even sound similar, the difference in a church trying to change everything that they are so a visitor feels welcome coming in, for the difference in that and a church loving God so much they're willing to change some of their traditions so a visitor can come in, is night and day different. And I think the church, one of the things we're trying to do in Altona is a new preacher comes in and things shift and change one of the reasons that I felt that this church, when we were praying about it and looking at it and visiting with the committee and the people from here, one of the things that really makes this church able to do what God's calling it to do is it is a family. We love one another. We care about the community, and we want to see people impacted for better. And so because of that love, we can make adjustments to tradition to allow that love to be better shared. You look at the love of a marriage from the honeymoon to the 60th wedding anniversary. It's the same love affair, but it's very different at the 60th wedding anniversary than it is at the beginning on the honeymoon. And the church has to be willing to change the non-essentials to hold true to the essentials, so that as the life cycle around us changes, as our life cycle changes, we can be relevant and we can be moving forward, founded on that scriptural mandate of solid doctrine, that idea of the love of God permeating the church and reaching the people.
Amen. Yeah. I like it. Anything else, Brother Joe?
I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, I don't want to go too long, but I do appreciate it. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, leave them below. Come see us at any time. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
We'll see you later.